We appreciate your contributions, Ellis. My name is Ellis Granger, and I knew right then I was about to get screwed. 43 years old, 10 years with Meriton Global Logistics in Denver, and I had never heard Chairman Randall Bloom use that tone with me before. The kind of voice you use when you're about to put down a loyal dog. I sat in the mahogany boardroom at 3 p.m. on a Thursday, still wearing the travel dust from flying back early from Houston. 3 hours ago, I had shaken hands with Continental Shipping's CEO after closing our biggest contract to date. 18 months, $12 million in revenue, and they specifically requested me to handle their account personally. My phone had been buzzing with congratulations from the team all morning. Now Bloom was looking at me like I had disappointed him somehow. Strategic Growth Presentation, the Outlook invite had called it. Mandatory attendance. I should have known something was wrong when my assistant, Janet, could not look me in the eye when she handed me the printed agenda. 22 years she had been with this company, and she always knew which way the wind was blowing before anyone else. The other board members sat stiff as mannequins around the table. Gregory Williams, our CFO, kept checking his watch. Patricia Hayes, head of operations, studied her fingernails like they held the secrets of the universe. None of them would meet my eyes. I had built something here. When I started, Meriton was pulling in maybe $30 million a year, scraping by on local freight contracts and warehouse storage. Regional stuff. Small time. I changed that. I spent weekends at industry conferences, flew to client dinners on my own dime, answered calls at midnight when shipments went sideways. I made friends, real friends, the kind who trusted me with their business because they trusted me as a person. Continental Shipping, Morrison Manufacturing, Hartwell Industries. These were not just accounts on a spreadsheet. These were relationships I had nurtured for years, built on handshake deals and kept promises. Bloom shuffled his papers and cleared his throat. We have some exciting news to share about the future direction of the company. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The same one I got the day my ex-wife told me she had been thinking about us. The same one I got when my father called to say the doctors found something on his scan. That sick certainty that everything was about to change, and not for the better. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see the Denver skyline stretched out under an October sky. 10 floors down, traffic moved like blood through arteries. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that mine was about to get turned upside down. Bloom smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I came to Meriton straight out of the Army, 20 years old with a logistics background and no idea what I wanted to do with my life. My father had worked construction his whole life, came home every night with concrete dust in his hair and steel in his spine. He taught me that work was about more than a paycheck. It was about building something that lasted. Find something you can take pride in, he told me the day I got discharged. Something that matters. Logistics mattered. Moving goods from point A to point B sounds simple until you factor in weather delays, customs holdups, driver shortages, and equipment failures. I was good at solving problems, better at building relationships. Within 5 years, I was handling our biggest accounts. Within 10, I was bringing in clients nobody else could touch. Bloom had been different back then, hungrier. He used to walk the warehouse floor, knew every driver by name, understood that business was built on trust. Somewhere along the way, he started spending more time in corporate retreats and industry galas, talking about synergy and market positioning instead of getting his hands dirty. The warning signs had been there if I had bothered to look. 3 months ago, Bloom hired Sean Eastman as a strategic consultant. Harvard MBA, father owned a shipping empire on the East Coast, the kind of connections that opened doors I had to kick down. Eastman spent most of his time in meetings I was not invited to, asking questions about my client relationships. Just trying to understand the landscape, he had said when I asked what he needed to know about Continental Shipping. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Janet had mentioned seeing Eastman in Bloom's office after hours, poring over client files. She said it casual, like she was commenting on the weather, but Janet never said anything casual. Every word that woman spoke had weight behind it. My ex-wife used to say I was too trusting. You see the best in people, Ellis, even when they are showing you their worst. Maybe she was right. I wanted to believe that 10 years of loyalty meant something. That building this company from 30 million to over 100 million in annual revenue would count for something when the chips were down. I kept waiting for Bloom to acknowledge what I had accomplished. The Continental deal was not just big money, it was validation. Proof that my way of doing business still worked in a world increasingly obsessed with algorithms and profit margins. Instead, he had called this meeting. Through the boardroom windows, I watched a freight truck navigate the downtown traffic. Probably one of ours. I wondered if the driver knew his job might depend on whatever was about to happen in this room. Bloom opened a folder and pulled out a document I did not recognize. "Ellis, I want you to meet someone." The conference room door opened and Sean Eastman walked in like he owned the place. Expensive suit, confident stride, handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds. I had seen him around the office for months, but something was different now. The way he carried himself. The way the board members suddenly sat up straighter. "Sean will be taking over your position as Director of Client Relations, effective immediately," Bloom announced. No preamble. No explanation. Just a knife between the ribs, clean and quick. I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. 10 years. Continental Shipping. Morrison Manufacturing. Hartwell Industries. All the late nights, weekend calls, relationship building, gone. "We appreciate everything you have done for Meriton," Bloom continued, his voice taking on that corporate tone managers use when they are about to screw you. "But we need someone with better industry connections to take us to the next level. Nothing personal. It is just business." Nothing personal. I looked around the table. Williams would not meet my eyes. Hayes was studying her phone like it held the secrets of the universe. These people had smiled at my birthday parties, shaken my hand when I closed deals, told me I was family. Family does not do this. "The transition will be seamless," Eastman said, his voice smooth as silk. "I have already reached out to several key accounts to introduce myself." Continental was very receptive to the change. That stopped me cold. Continental was very receptive. The same Continental whose CEO, Tom Morrison, had personally requested that I handle their account. The same Tom who had invited me to his daughter's wedding last spring, who called me Ellis instead of Mr. Granger, who trusted me with his company's most sensitive shipments. I stood up slowly, straightened my tie, and looked Bloom directly in the eye. "Connections are everything in this business," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "You are absolutely right about that." I shook Eastman's hand. "Best of luck to you, Sean. I am sure you will do just fine." Then I walked out. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Tom Morrison. A text from Janet. "Cleaning out your office. Sorry, Ellis." The elevator descended past floors of people who thought they knew how business worked. Past cubicles full of ambitious young professionals who believed that loyalty and hard work were enough. Past a reception desk where visitors came to meet with a company I had helped build from the ground up. By the time I reached the parking garage, I was already planning my next move. Connections are everything. They were about to learn exactly what that meant. I spent Thursday night in my home office, surrounded by 10 years of business cards, client files, and contracts. My house felt too quiet without the constant buzz of work calls and email notifications. Janet had boxed up my personal items and left them by my front door with a note. "They changed the locks. Sorry." 22 years with the company, and they locked out my assistant for helping me. Friday morning, I called Tom Morrison at Continental Shipping. He answered on the first ring. "Ellis, thank God. I have been trying to reach you since yesterday. Some guy named Eastman called claiming he was taking over our account. I told him to go to hell, but my procurement team is asking questions. Tom, I need to tell you something." I explained the situation. No sugarcoating, no corporate speak. Just the truth. Tom listened without interrupting, which was his way. 26 years running Continental, and he had heard every sob story in the book. "Those sons of bitches," he said when I finished. "After everything you have done for that company." "I am starting my own firm," I told him. "Granger Logistics. Same service, same team, just without the politics. Count us in. I will have legal draft a termination letter for Meriton today." One down. I called Patricia Hoffman at Morrison Manufacturing next. She had been with Morrison for 15 years, worked her way up from shipping clerk to vice president of operations. We had solved a dozen crises together, from dock worker strikes to hurricane delays. They did what? She said when I explained. Ellis, that company would be nothing without you. Morrison Manufacturing is pulling our contract immediately. 2 down. By lunch, I had talked to 8 of my major clients. 7 were ready to jump ship with me. The 8th, Hartwell Industries, wanted to meet in person before making any decisions. That should have been my first warning. I drove to Hartwell's headquarters in the tech center, expecting a routine conversation with their logistics manager, Dave Chen. Instead, I found myself sitting across from their new procurement director, some kid who looked fresh out of business school. "Mr. Granger, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us," he said, consulting a tablet like he was reading from a script. However, Hartwell Industries has decided to honor our existing contract with Meriton Global Logistics. Mr. Eastman presented a very compelling case for continuity. My blood went cold. Mr. Eastman was here? Yesterday afternoon, right after you were terminated, actually. He had some interesting insights about client poaching and breach of fiduciary duty. The kid slid a document across the table, legal letterhead. Hartwell was not just staying with Meriton. They were threatening to sue me if I contacted any of their employees about logistics services. He also mentioned that several clients might be reconsidering their hasty decisions once they understand the legal implications of following you. I drove back to my house in silence, my phone buzzing with incoming calls. Tom Morrison first. "Ellis, my legal team is getting pushback on the contract termination. Meriton is claiming breach of contract, threatening to sue for the full value of our agreement. 18 months at $12 million. My board is getting nervous." Patricia Hoffman called 20 minutes later with the same story. Meriton was playing hardball, threatening legal action against any client who tried to follow me. Eastman had spent the morning visiting my biggest accounts, armed with lawyers and veiled threats. By evening, 5 of my 7 confirmed clients had called back to apologize. "It is not personal, Ellis. We just cannot afford a legal battle right now." I sat in my kitchen, staring at a business plan I had scribbled on a napkin. Granger Logistics. It sounded good in theory, but theory does not pay rent or legal bills. Eastman had outmaneuvered me. While I was making phone calls and shaking hands, he was building a legal wall around my client base. Corporate warfare at its finest. But he had made one critical mistake. He assumed I would fight fair. Saturday morning, I drove to Janet's house with coffee and pastries from her favorite bakery. She lived in a neat ranch home in Arvada, the kind of place where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick. "They fired me yesterday," she said before I could speak. 22 years, Ellis. 22 years. And they gave me 2 hours to pack my desk. "I am sorry, Janet, this is not what I wanted." "Oh, honey, I know." She poured coffee into mismatched mugs, the kind of comfortable informality you only get from someone who has worked beside you for a decade. "But I learned some things before they walked me out." She handed me a manila folder. "Remember when Eastman started asking all those questions about your client relationships? I may have accidentally made copies of some documents he requested. Inside the folder were copies of my client files, contact information, contract details, personal notes I had written about relationship building. Everything Eastman needed to systematically target my accounts. He knew exactly who to call and what to say," Janet continued. "Had their legal team draft threatening letters before you were even fired. This whole thing was planned weeks ago." The deeper I looked, the worse it got. Eastman had not just stolen my job. He had studied my methods, analyzed my relationships, and built a strategy to neutralize me before I even knew I was under attack. But there was more. "Look at page 12, Janet said. A memo from Bloom to the board, dated 3 weeks ago. Subject: Succession Planning. Director of Client Relations. The memo outlined a plan to remove me before the end of Q4 and replace me with a candidate with superior industry connections and family legacy advantages. It specifically mentioned concerns about my over-personalized approach to client relations and the risk of client dependency on a single employee. They had been planning this for months. Page 15, Janet said quietly. A financial projection showing how Meriton could increase profit margins by renegotiating my client contracts. Without me in the picture, they could push for better terms, reduce service levels, and pocket the difference. They were not just replacing me. They were planning to exploit the relationships I had built. There is more. Annette pulled out her phone and showed me a voice recording. I may have accidentally left my phone recording during Bloom's meeting with Eastman yesterday. I listened to Bloom's voice crackling through the speaker. Granger was useful for building the business, but he is too much of a liability now. Clients trust him more than they trust the company. That is dangerous. We need someone who understands that loyalty flows up, not down. Eastman's response was equally chilling. My father dealt with the same problem when he took over Eastman Shipping. Sometimes you have to cut out the cancer, even if it hurts short term. They were not just firing me. They were systematically destroying my ability to compete. The legal threats, the contract disputes, the intimidation tactics, all planned in advance. I handed the phone back to Janet and sat in silence for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I thought about my father coming home every night with concrete dust in his hair. He had taught me that work was about building something that lasted. But he had also taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what you have built. "I am going to teach them about loyalty," I said finally. "Flowing down or up? Both directions." Monday morning, I did not start my own company. Instead, I made a different kind of call. Velocity Freight Solutions. This is Catherine speaking. "Hi, Catherine. This is Ellis Granger. I would like to speak with your CEO about a business proposition." Velocity Freight was Meriton's biggest competitor in the Denver market. Smaller, more agile, and hungry for the kind of contracts I had been managing. Their CEO, Michael Santos, had tried to recruit me twice over the past 5 years. "Ellis Granger," Santos said when he came on the line. "I heard some interesting news about you and Meriton. Coffee?" We met at a small cafe in Lodo, away from the corporate corridors where industry gossip spread like wildfire. Santos was exactly what you would expect from someone who had built a logistics company from scratch. Direct, practical, and smart enough to recognize opportunity when it walked through his door. "Let me guess," he said after I explained my situation. "You want a job?" "I want a partnership." That got his attention. "I bring you $12 million in new business within 60 days, I said. "In exchange, you give me equity and complete autonomy over client relations. No interference, no corporate oversight, no Harvard MBA kids asking questions about my methods. $12 million is a big number, Ellis." Continental Shipping, Morrison Manufacturing, Alpine Distribution, Rockwell Freight, Cascade Industries, and 4 others. All contracts I brought to Meriton, all relationships I built personally. They fired me, but they cannot fire the relationships. Santos stirred his coffee and studied me like he was solving a puzzle. "Meriton will fight you. Lawsuits, contract disputes, the whole 9 yards. Let them try. I never signed a non-compete clause. Bloom always said those agreements showed a lack of trust in employees. And the clients are tired of being treated like spreadsheet entries instead of business partners." I pulled out my phone and showed him text messages from the weekend. "Tom Morrison. Ready to move when you are. Patricia Hoffman. Morrison Manufacturing is just waiting for your signal. Dave Chen from Alpine Distribution. Hartwell caved to pressure, but Alpine does not bend to threats." The legal intimidation worked on 2 companies, I continued. But it backfired with the rest. Nobody likes being bullied, especially by their own service provider. Santos leaned back in his chair. "What kind of equity are we talking about?" 20% for the business I bring in, 30% if we hit 15 million by year end. That is a lot of equity for business you do not technically own yet. It is a lot of business for a company that wants to double in size overnight. We shook hands in the parking lot. By Wednesday, I had signed employment papers with Velocity Freight as Executive Vice President of Strategic Accounts. By Friday, I was making calls. Tom, this is Ellis. I have some good news. The conversations were different this time. Instead of asking clients to take a risk on an untested startup, I was offering them a proven alternative. Velocity had the infrastructure, the insurance coverage, and the legal backing to handle major contracts. All they needed was the relationships. Continental Shipping terminated their Meriton contract on Monday. Morrison Manufacturing followed on Tuesday. By the end of the week, 6 major accounts had switched to Velocity. Eastman called me Thursday afternoon. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I said. "We really do not." I hung up and got back to work. The call came at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Bloom himself, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You are destroying this company," he said without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Randall. 18 million in lost revenue in 6 weeks. 18 million, Ellis. The board is asking questions." I sat in my new office at Velocity Freight, looking out at the Denver skyline through windows that faced directly toward Meriton's building. We had deliberately chosen this location. Sometimes the best revenge is making sure your enemies can see exactly how well you're doing. "Sounds like a management problem," I said. "We can work this out. Come back. Name your price." I already did. 20% equity in your company, complete autonomy over client relations, and a public apology for how you handled my termination. Silence on the other end. "That is insane." "Then I guess we have nothing to discuss." I hung up and turned back to my computer. 3 more clients had requested proposals from Velocity over the weekend. Word was spreading through the industry that Ellis Granger was available again, and this time he was working for a company that understood the value of relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, who now worked as my executive assistant at Velocity. Eastman just walked into the break room looking like someone stole his lunch money. At 3 p.m., I got another call. This time from Gregory Williams, Meriton's CFO. "Ellis, we need to talk about a transition back to Meriton. The board is prepared to make you a generous offer." "How generous?" "Your old position back, 20% salary increase, and a seat on the board of directors." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "Greg, 6 weeks ago you sat in that boardroom and watched Randall fire me. You did not say a word. Now you want me back because your golden boy Eastman cannot manage the clients I spent 10 years cultivating. It is a good offer, Ellis. It is a desperate offer. And the answer is no." That evening, I drove past Meriton's building on my way home. Half the lights were off. The parking lot that used to be full at 7 p.m. was nearly empty. 3 months later, I was reviewing quarterly numbers when Janet knocked on my office door. "Ellis, there is something you should see." She handed me a newspaper clipping. Business section, local news. Meriton Global Logistics acquired by Eastern Transport Holdings. I read the article twice. Bloom was quoted as saying the acquisition would provide new opportunities for growth and expansion. Corporate speak for we were hemorrhaging money and had to sell before we went bankrupt. Eastman was not mentioned in the article at all. "What happened to our Harvard friend?" I asked. "Fired last month," Janet said. Apparently his father's connections did not extend to damage control. I folded the newspaper and set it aside. No satisfaction in watching a company die, even one that had betrayed me. Meriton had been my home for 10 years. Good people worked there, people who had nothing to do with Bloom's bad decisions. "Janet, see if any of the warehouse staff from Meriton need work. We could use experienced people." "Already on it. I have 6 resumes on your desk." I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing applications from former Meriton employees, people I'd worked with for years, now looking for new opportunities because their executives had prioritized connections over competence. At 6 p.m., I locked my office and walked to the parking garage. Tom Morrison was hosting a client dinner that night, the kind of relationship-building event that Eastman probably would have delegated to an underling. I drove through downtown Denver, past office buildings full of ambitious young professionals who thought business was about algorithms and profit margins. Maybe some of them were right. But I had learned something different from my father, something about building things that last. Trust flows both ways, and loyalty is earned one relationship at a time.